Virtual communication. Any of you leaders out there lead virtual teams, and I'm talking maybe they're spread across the US in different time zones or spread across the world in different time zones, or maybe you just have a virtual office within an area, and after COVID, everybody went virtual, you got rid of your office space. We're going to talk about how to communicate in that virtual world. We are seeing more and more virtual offices, less and less physical offices in organizations, and it's important to understand how to communicate. So stick with us because we're going to discuss some challenges and some solutions. Welcome everybody to the Leaders Leading Leaders podcast. Welcome everybody to the Leaders Leading Leaders podcast. I am your host, John Espinosa. Thank you all for joining me today. For those new listeners out there, welcome to the Go Be Great community. For those listeners that are continuing to support the podcast, I want to thank you. It means a lot to me that you spend the time listening to the podcast. If you like what you hear, I would encourage you to subscribe. I've been in the leadership business for 15 plus years, mentoring and coaching leaders, developing training for leaders, and walking right beside leaders as we meet our mission of getting others to where they're going, and that starts with you, the leader. So today, we're talking all about virtual communication. Let me set the stage. A lot of organizations, even prior to the pandemic, were in a virtual state. So either they had team members across the US or globally, or maybe they had an organization here, but they went into an office, but they didn't necessarily interact face to face with the people in their office. Maybe their team was, again, it was HR, it was budget, it was one of those centralized services that they provided support for their local office, but they had team members in different locations. So the tools that we used back then, we'd get on telephone, a telcon. I call it a telcon, a telephone conference for those that don't remember telcons, but you dial into a number and everybody would join, right? So you'd hear people joining, and conference rooms were set up with these elaborate speaker systems and microphones, but you never saw anybody. It was all just over telephone lines. Now, there were some organizations out there that were on the cutting edge, and they did have video. They were using Skype or some other video conferencing tools. We were in training. We used WebCT. It was very early on the Zoom part. There was some Adobe products out there that we used. So from a training standpoint, we were doing virtual training even prior to telecom, internet. We were doing satellite. So that was our virtual way. So I've been in this virtual communication world for a long time, even dating back. I'm going to date myself. Back in the 90s when you had course management systems like Blackboard and Angel and some of the early systems that you'd go log on. If any of you were in college during that time, 90s, 2000s, you probably had some sort of online course management system. Nothing like the course management systems that we have today, but they were virtual ways that we would communicate. They were chat boards and discussion threads. I'm dating myself here, but I want to set the stage that virtual communication isn't a new thing. People have been communicating virtually, even all the way back to emails. I would consider that a form of virtual communication because we're going to talk about how emails have become something that we just CYA or send information. A lot of times we're communicating through our instant messaging systems or applications. So for the most part, virtual communication as leaders within teams, within communities has been around. There are a ton of applications out there that you can download on your cell phone, that you can download on your computer. We have webcams now that are built in basically to every single laptop. I haven't even seen a desktop probably in years. Now everybody gets a laptop. So we plug and play. We're able to bring it home. We're able to take it to work. It probably has a camera and it connects to the internet. So you can have communication virtually. So let's talk about some of the challenges. When I came onto the organization that I am currently in, it was a brand new position. It was a brand new section. So the team was relatively new to each other, was relatively new to the organization. I was coming into the organization brand new from another line of business. I had never worked in my current line of business. I didn't have a lot of background knowledge and specifically the organization I work in was a smaller service within that organization. My team was dispersed from Washington State to Washington, D.C., and everywhere in between. So for me, coming into that environment, post-pandemic, the tools still weren't there. Not everybody had webcams. The connectivity of our internet, the bandwidth at people's homes, even their home internets, a lot of times weren't strong enough to support video and audio over internet. So a lot of challenges were posed. One, I am a people person. So I love to talk to people face to face. I couldn't get that done in the environment that we were in because of the bandwidth and the connectivity issues. You'd either get audio or you'd get video, or you get choppy audio, or you get choppy video. Those were pretty much your two options there. So that was a challenge, not being able to see people, not being able to read their nonverbals. A lot of our communication is made up of nonverbal communication. And if you can't read people's reactions to things that you say, guess what? It makes communication pretty hard. The other piece, when you can't see people, you tend to overtalk. Do any of you in a meeting with overtalkers? And it may not be even on purpose. You may have people who have good things to say, good things to share, and they butt in. Because guess what? Before, when we were all sitting around a table in the conference room, you'd see people raise their hand or kind of move forward. You can't do that on a call that you just have audio and no video. So you get people who are easily able to hide in the background. As a leader, I always want to hear from everybody at the table. So you got to be more mindful as a leader. That piece was a challenge for me because I couldn't gauge people's nonverbals. People were over talking each other. A lot of times you'd say sorry and no, you go ahead. No, you go ahead, right? You get in that kind of banter back and forth. And one of you would go and then you'd over talk and it'd start all over again. It was that hamster wheel of trying to be able to communicate when you can't see each other. Another, piece that we really dived into post-pandemic and even prior to pandemic, we had instant messaging tools, but we had instant messaging applications that now we could do not only chat, we could create groups. We were able to collaborate in a team environment, Microsoft Teams or whatever application that you're using, Google, there's a ton out there, Slack that we use right now. But for the most part, it was a community. We built groups. You had bigger groups and then you break it down into sub-teams. And then the other challenge that you had was the misinterpretation. So again, going back to the instant messaging, the emailing, the non-verbal stuff, when you're not meeting, even when you don't have video, the intonation in somebody's voice. If I write an email or I write an instant message and I put it on all caps, what do you interpret that as? Like I'm screaming at you, right? So a lot of those challenges exists in a virtual environment. I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day, and he's in a chat group, team of probably more than 20, which for me, that's a lot in a chat group. He needed something. So he responded, put it in chat, asked a question. Guess what? It was an active chat, which is a good thing normally, but his question got lost in the responses. And the question he needed to ask was something that was important. He needed an immediate response. So guess what? Puts the question in there again. Again, very active chat, got lost in the chat. He spent 30 minutes trying to get an answer to a question when instant messaging, you should just be able to put a question in there and get a response. But if you got an active chat group, really 20 is too much for me. I would break that down. I try to keep my chat groups, my focus groups is what I call them, to probably about 4 to 5. That's the sweet spot. When something comes across, you still have that history there. I can still go in there and address it, or I just do one-on-one communication. So there's different strategies around how I use instant messaging. And then there's the email. We send a ton of email in my organization. And a lot of the emails that get drafted and sent and put in my inbox and sent out of my email account can be solved in less than 5-minute conversation. Are any of you in that same boat? A lot of what we do via email, if we just hold a meeting and talk about what we were sending in the email, we'd save a lot of time, save a lot of energy, and a lot of effort. So I talked about some challenges. So let's give you some solutions because I'm very practical and I want you all to walk away with some solutions. So let's start with the email piece. Subject headers. I love to use subject headers to identify whether I need to respond. So I will put First words, response needed. That lets me know I addressed that email in a response as needed. FYI, I put that in the subject header. For your information, it's just informative for me. So if I'm getting through and I'm short on time or hitting a meeting, I'm going to hit my respond emails, my FYI emails, I'm going to get to at a later time. Still going to get to them, but I'm going to get to them a later time. Action is another big word that we use. If there requires some sort of action on my part or action on somebody else's part, I put that right in the subject line. Length of emails. Get to the point. Bottom line up front. What do you want me to do? Don't write a narrative. Please don't write a novel in the email. The other part with writing an email, bullet it out. I've briefed many senior executives. Bottom line up front, give me the key points, finish it off. What do you need? Is it informative? Back to the subject header line. Is it just for your information? Is there an action needed? Do you need a response? Or are you part of the workflow and need to approve or disapprove something and then send it on? So that's email. Those are my tips and tricks for email. Instant messaging. We talked a lot about this earlier. Keep your groups small. Keep your focus groups small. For me, I have a big organization, probably around 40 or so, that we have a chat group in. A lot of times that chat group is used for our biweekly team meetings. Documents are shared in there, but there's not a lot of like question and answer going on in that chat group. Then within my team, I have a chat that I send out, hey, I'm going to be out of the office. Just FYI, informational type things. Again, not a lot of responses in there. We share when we get back from vacation, maybe pictures of the vacation, pictures of a celebration. Maybe you have somebody who's graduating, but a lot of times that just builds camaraderie. And that group's anywhere from 12 to 20-ish. I would keep that group still below 20, but it just builds. It's like the water cooler talk, right? That's how I consider that group. And then breaking it down to my focus groups of 5 or less, those are the groups that we do work in. Those are the groups that I'm asking questions, I'm getting a response back. If I have to put out an immediate message and I need an immediate response, that's where I'm normally going to put it. If it can wait, I'll put it in an email, make sure it's subject line accordingly, that an action is needed or a response is required, and then I'll go about it that way. I always have a philosophy with the email, read it within 24 hours, respond within 48 hours. If there's not an urgent message on the top, that's my modus operandi. My team understands that. So they also understand if they need a response that day within 24 hours, you better let me know so I can respond to that. Going back to the instant messaging, with my sub teams, well, that's where we'll also work on documents. So I'll put a document on a shared server or a shared site, and that's where we'll go in and collaborate. So those are ways that I address emails and instant messages. Let's talk about team meetings real quick. When you're on video, I always like to keep the meeting, and you guys have heard my philosophy about meetings, keep them under 30 minutes. Attention spans, people are very busy. Keep them under 30 minutes, and really if you can keep them to about 15 minutes, that's probably it. But a 15-minute meeting, if you got a good agenda and you got good points, if you need somebody to bring information, send that out in advance. Meeting invites, that's another area where I'll put a lot of information in, and then right up front, if they need to bring anything, right at the very, very top, bring XYZ report. Bring an answer to this question. Brainstorm ideas about this problem or this challenge. Right up top, first thing, let them know what you want them to bring to that meeting. That way you can spend that time very efficiently within that meeting. So again, virtually communicating. If you don't have video, it's even more important that you have everything that they need to bring and then give them an agenda for those people that have to process. It makes those meetings more efficient. It makes people understand what the purpose of the meeting, purpose, process, and any preparation. Those are the 3 things that you need to identify for every single meeting that you conduct virtually. So hopefully I've given you some tips and tricks for those 3 areas: email, instant message, and then your video conference calls, your audio conference calls that you're doing over the computer. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call somebody. What I always do, instant messaging before I call anybody, hey, can you talk real quick? This is regarding whatever I need to talk to them about. I need 5 minutes to discuss that report you sent me. Rather than sending feedback in an email, getting feedback back, you're interpreting an email, I'm interpreting an email or response. Sometimes it all can be solved within 5 minutes. And there's some generational challenges that we're going to have. Your baby boomer generation that are in the workforce, they like email. That's how they keep track of everything. A lot of times people live in their inbox. That's how they schedule things. That's how they task things. That's how they prioritize, right? So understand that. If you have a manager, a leader, a supervisor, or if you have someone on your team that's of that generation, they may be more comfortable in that email environment. Vice versa, if you have some millennials on your team, some Gen Xers on your team, they may be more comfortable in the instant messenger. You're going to have to get in that instant message and communicate. They love just a simple hello, good morning team, how are you doing? Hope everybody had a great weekend. Those little things will go a long way. They don't seem very important, but they love that interaction. It's almost like a touch point. It's almost like someone knocking on your cubicle or knocking on your door or giving you a call and saying that. Just put it in the chat and blast it out. And then the one-on-one, I always use that when I need a personal conversation, I need a personal response, or if it's a personal matter that I got to ask or check or something like that. I don't bother the bigger group if I'm only talking to one or two people, because you don't want the team to become desensitized to comments in the bigger chat. Direct those comments to who they need to be directed to. Virtual communication. It's here to stay. As leaders, we need to learn how to work in the virtual world. Be mindful of time zones. That's one thing that we didn't talk about, but as you're scheduling meetings or you're IMing people, be mindful of your counterparts, especially if it's 6 a.m., 5 a.m., and you're on the East Coast and you're dealing with somebody in the West Coast or maybe even Alaska. Be mindful of that. That's another important point in this whole world of virtual communication. As a leader, working in virtual communication, I hope some of the tips and tricks that I shared will help you be better communicators in that virtual environment. Go be great. We'll talk to everyone later. Bye-bye. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps us get others to where they're going.